Hi everyone, I'm Hanovi Schoonover, the Training and Resource Coordinator for Redmond Consulting, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. Before we begin, for those who may not know, Redmond is a nonprofit organization that provides tribal technical assistance on a variety of programs, including but not limited to housing and homeless services, children and youth, and elder abuse. This ranges from policy review via email to site visits. If you are interested, you can contact me at the email I'm putting in the chat box at HONOVI at redmond.net, and that's red-win.net. Or you can contact us by the presenter email at the end. Joining us today is Raquel DeHerrera. Raquel is of the Taos Pueblo, Chiricahua Apache, and Mexican descent, and has been with Redmond for 5 years. Her bachelor's is in sociology, and she is currently working towards a master's. She has been a trainer for the National Tribal Advocate Center, and she has presented at Redmond's Creating Sister Space, creating an interconnected web of support on decolonizing trauma work and safety planning in a transitional housing program. She has also provided webinars on documentation within tribal housing authorities and education groups, along with decolonizing trauma. She is currently the coordinator of the Tribal College Campus Grant, and she was previously the director of the HSEA Advocate Program, which is a project of Redmond Consulting that offers culturally specific advocacy in Colorado Springs. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can send them to the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we can see that in our presentation box. And we will be checking periodically to see if you have any questions. I will now turn it over to Raquel.
Thank you, Hanovi. Thank you everyone for joining us today on this webinar, Safety Planning for Tribal College Sexual Assault Victims. I just want to go over, this is a very hard topic to talk about. So please feel free to take the space if you need to, during this webinar and after, really to make the space to just take care of yourself in whatever ways that you need to, just because this can be very hard to talk about. So just please feel free if you need to, you can chat with me as well on here. If you have anything that comes up, you can send me a direct message, but just please feel free to take the space if that means, just pausing for a moment and breathing. That is completely fine, and I welcome that. I just want to thank everyone for coming to this webinar. I think during these times of COVID, when we think about safety planning, some things can be difficult when in trying to navigate how to provide safety planning for students who are victims of sexual assault. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to bring that. I think there's a Q&A button on the bottom. Feel free to put any questions in there and chat. Once again, I think if you put anything in the chat, your name will come up. So if you don't want that, you can send me a direct message as well for questions, or Hanovi, and he can pass them my way. So just take that time. This project is OVW funded. We are the project, or we're the technical assistant providers for tribal college campuses when focusing on a holistic sexual assault response. Next slide, Hanovi, please. Thank you. So, when thinking about safety, I don't know if anybody else is on Instagram, but I love finding a lot of inspirational quotes and just things on Instagram. And I came across this, and her name is Mina B. I don't know you can probably put that name on, and if you have Instagram, and she has wonderful resources. And I think this piece for me really stood out, especially when we think about safety planning, is that it's such a vital necessity. Safety is, in life, that supports our development and mental health. And without it, people are more susceptible to experiencing trauma, mood instability, anxiety, and living in a constant state of fear. And I think that, trauma, we all have experienced trauma in some sense. And so I think that when we think about safety as, looking beyond physical safety, but really thinking about a holistic meaning of what safety means, and why it's vital for students who have experienced sexual violence, why that's such a vital piece to have while you're on campus, while you're a student, while you are, working towards your degree. And I think this is just a big piece to think about why, if we don't have a sense of safety, a lot of these things are impacted, and it can make staying in school, it can make, all of these things a lot harder for us. So just to keep that in mind, that, safety planning is a vital, vital need. Next slide, please. And I wanted to ask just who's in this webinar, kind of what your role is on campus, whether it's a student or an advocate or a counselor. And I think you can put that in Q&A or the chat if you're comfortable, just so I have an idea of kind of who's in this webinar. And I can leave about counselor. Human resources, disability. So we have, counselors, human resources, a disability coordinator, which is great. I'm so happy to have you here. A coordinator and counselor. I love it. I've a lot of the most of the colleges I've worked with counselors. And so it's a very important piece when we think about having resources on campus. Our counselors really do, are pivotal in providing safety and just resources for students. So I'm glad that you're all here. My partner, he's been a counselor for a long time. And so I know the work is just tremendous. So thank you for joining me. If you have any questions in particular, please feel free to put them in. Things that I just wanted to start with in considerations for safety planning is something is that it's ongoing, though, that these things are ongoing. And especially when I think about students who come in and who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, or, who, maybe have experienced sexual assault, not recently, but previously and before coming into campus, that it really is an ongoing piece that it really, there's the immediate safety planning, and then there's long-term safety planning. So just knowing that it's ongoing and that it's not one size fits all, that what works for some might not work for everyone. So it really should be tailored and guided by the student who, they're really guiding that work, guiding the safety plan. They're saying what works for them and what doesn't. And then it's dependent on campus structure. So again, it's going to depend on, the resources that are at hand. Are there dorm rooms? Do you have, are there on-campus housing? Is there a campus that is on tribal lands, and then maybe there's a campus on, in an urban setting? So it's going to be dependent on the campus structure. Again, it's going to depend on what the students need, immediate and then long-term. What are they going to need? And then accommodations, this is something that, I think, um, especially when we think about Title IX and Clary and what are some of those pieces that we have to provide, what are some of those accommodations? So being aware, considering what the college in those policies and protocols and what that looks like, being aware of those accommodations. And then again, holistic, I think, is a big piece. So in this project, we really focus on a holistic sexual assault response. And that is really looking at, in terms of safety planning, that really means, okay, so thinking about physical safety, but then thinking about emotional safety, thinking about mental safety, spiritual safety, and how we can provide options for students to kind of assist in that safety planning. Next slide, please, Hanovi. So when I think about a campus advocate, and this can be definitely counselors or just anyone who's really advocating and working with students who have been victims of sexual assault, really the role can be identify current and long-term needs for safety. So again, it goes into that ongoing process that it's, really looking at the picture that we have right now and then the long-term picture. So identifying those current needs for safety. And Vicki, who's our executive director, when she talks about safety planning, it really is that piece that we're really providing a space where kind of gets the critical thinking working up to where they start putting the pieces there, and we're just here to support that, where they start thinking about their safety. And it's really tailored for them and how to keep them safe, and it's personalized, it's personable for them. So we're just here to kind of help identify some of those needs, thinking about what maybe it's something that they haven't even considered, um, being a safety concern for them. So thinking about that, and then helping identify resources that can help address safety. So again, protection orders, legal aid, legal processes. So having those resources at hand, and then a sexual assault exam, forensic exam, who to go to. And I think part of that is to help students identify those resources, but also having a relationship with them, with legal, with your SANE nurses, and with maybe your local community advocates, really having that relationship so that when you are, working on a safety plan with students, who you are kind of referring to, or who personally, who students are going to be seeking those services from. It would be really hard to refer someone to seek a forensic exam and it be a completely re-traumatizing or hard experience. So I really think part of our role is to establish those relationships with those resources. So again, identifying resources, but also having partnerships and relationships with those resources. And then, again, this goes into just that critical thinking. You're helping guide students by asking questions to nurture, that critical thinking for safety planning, so that, down the road, they are able to identify their needs, and they're able to identify, some things that they wouldn't have considered before, that they can, they will be able to think about safety in a way that they maybe weren't able to before. And something that I think about that's really important is to, our role is really not to, uh, we're here to advocate and support autonomy and empowerment. And I always have a struggling relationship with that word empowerment, but really helping victims and survivors see, their power. And safety planning, I think, is just another piece, and it can be really hard as well, because when we're safety planning, oftentimes, unfortunately, having to regulate, victims and survivors can feel like they're having to regulate their behavior, and that they shouldn't have to change classes. They shouldn't have to move from their dorm to another. And that, I think to be, a person to kind of help them navigate that and validate that, yes, you're absolutely right that you shouldn't have to worry about these things, or you shouldn't have um, to be the one to kind of rearrange your whole life and validate that, but also, how important it is um, to think about and consider safety. Next slide, please, Hanovi. So again, just thinking about considerations, you want to identify resources and have a really great relationship with your stay nurse. And I think it even goes into further, maybe transportation, if, the hospital that provides, SANE exams or has a SANE nurse, a specific sexual assault nurse examiner who's been trained to, provide sexual assault forensic exams. If there's a way to provide transportation, you want to make sure that you are advocating for that. I think a big piece when working with victims and survivors of sexual assault, one thing that I find when it comes to safety planning is identifying triggers and how to safety plan for when that happens, especially when we're working with students who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, or again, have, experienced sexual assault prior to coming in to on campus. These are things that I think you will start working with, that, it's going to be, how do you identify these triggers? And then how do you work through those? Again, a safety plan for the legal process if going forward. So really, when I think about safety planning in that regard, it's going to be, really walking them through what is that process. So they've reported it to the Title IX investigator. What next? What can they expect? How do they keep themselves safe through this process? And then it's really to provide them with, the ability to see what's next. The investigation, and then having those options and resources, and then going into, especially with the new Title IX regulations, that, there could be, especially with cross-examination, there could be some victim blaming, or having to go on trial. So you really want to prepare a safety plan on, what to expect, and then how to identify those things. And then helping identify safe support systems. I think whether it's sexual assault, sexual abuse, domestic violence, stalking, it can be very isolating. And so I think providing a space where students can really dig deep to see who their safe support systems are, that I think that's critical when we think about students, especially thinking about, their relationship with, if there are, student housing, their RA, their resident advisor, the dean of students, or if there's, counselors who, they might be, that might be that safe support system. Even faculty, are there, faculty, professors, staff that they have a close relationship with, that can be their support system. So, you really want to have these considerations in place. And I think especially, before you're even safety planning with students, you kind of want to have an idea of this. You want to have this idea of who the resources are, what does that process look like? So knowing exactly what that process is, whether it's a Title IX investigation, what a sexual assault forensic exam, what does that process look like? Especially, when you are in that crisis moment and you're safety planning, part of that's going to be safety planning with what to expect in any of these areas. So whether it's through the legal process, through the exam process, you really those are going to be those critical pieces, especially in a crisis moment. And then when you're thinking about long-term and even in that crisis moment, thinking about triggers and how that might impact in the long run and how to safety plan for that. So these are just considerations to think about. Next slide, please, Hanobi. Another important piece that I think about when we safety plan is really thinking about our Two-Spirit and LGBTQ relatives and safety planning and just some of those considerations. I think, especially when it comes to outing, working with students who maybe they're not out to their family, to some of their friends, and maybe the threat, for even reporting sexual assault or experiencing violence can be, there's a concern of outing. So you want to make sure that you know how to safety plan for that. And then safety plan for not being believed or for it being minimized. And then safety planning for layers of violence. So oppression, family, friends, community, thinking about, so really grabbing those support systems and having, that support. And then again, I think for our trans relatives, really, thinking about and preparing for, how the legal system, they might use, even law enforcement using, pronouns and names that aren't theirs, and how that can be really re-victimizing, re-traumatizing. So preparing students for that as part of that long-term safety planning, so that it doesn't just, happen too fast, too soon, and kind of brings back a sense of feeling re-traumatized and re-victimized, but preparing for, what to know, what's going to happen next. So those are things that you want to consider as well. And I think part of the safety planning piece, and this is just advocating, is really advocating for systems to kind of change that. Why, is it necessary for, it might be for the legal sense to do that, but start getting them, legal partners and law enforcement, campus police, to kind of start thinking about these things. How is it, how could it be re-traumatizing and re-victimizing, victimizing again? So just thinking about that. And next slide, please. So when I think about immediate safety planning, part of it is assessing the current risk of violence and harm. So thinking about what is the immediate harm that we need to look out for, and how do we address that and assess that. So that's really going to be working with the student and really, whether it's just listening to them and understanding what they really feel there's a need for, that there's this risk, and to address that and to and validate that. Again, physical safety, you really want to make sure that you're considering physical safety. Are there classes that does that student have a class with their perpetrator, and how is the college responsible for accommodating for that? Again, with dorms, are they in the same dorm, and how is the college responsible for accommodating that? And then extracurricular activities, and then home. And I think right now in the time of COVID, this poses a really hard thing to navigate, especially if there's sexual assault that happened off campus and is in the home, and their resources are really hard to come by. And so how do you create a safety plan for that? You want to consider. So just things like, making sure that they have, a support system, that if things, escalate to a point that they need assistance, that they have that support, that they have kind of a plan of, if this happens, then I will, this is the action that I will take. Especially I think when it's important to kind of plan for these things, Just because when you are in a trauma, when there's that trauma moment, you can freeze, and so it's good just to talk about it. When I was an advocate, I always struggled because I didn't want to, when working with someone, I didn't want to scare them. I didn't want to say, oh, what if this happens, so that you have to navigate to where it's, this could be a possibility, not that it will, but what will happen, what will you be able to do in case something like this happens. And so it's really just talking about these possibilities of safety, and then things to consider. And I think especially for sexual assault, it really does, um, you really have to assess that current risk, and you really have to assess that, you know, sexual assault really does, for me, it really can, it harms our spirit. And so, there's a lot that you have to consider when thinking about immediate safety. And it's not just, physical safety, but it's that mental and emotional safety. How do you assess that? And how do you talk about it in a way that's not scary, but it is in a way that provides resources for students to think about that big picture, and how to keep safe. And with COVID, it can be very hard, especially if no one's allowed on campus. And so, finding ways that might be safe, I think, um, even being on the computer and at home, it can be hard to provide, space where you can talk to a counselor about things because maybe your perpetrator is in the other room. So those are things that you have, as a campus. I think those are struggles that we're navigating and finding ways on and how to address those barriers. And so I think that's going to be very hard, to think about, but that's where safety planning comes in, where it really provides those tools for our students, to think about, what are their options. Um, and making sure that they have the um, whether it's campus police, if they're on campus, law enforcement, having all of those resources on hand. That way they're not, having to find it, that they just have it prepared. I think another thing that's tricky is, where do they store it? Where do they keep all this information, especially if their perpetrator is in their household? Um, and so figuring out ways that they can, have this information and not have it be a risk for them. That's another piece that you want to consider. So that's, when you assess the current risk, if they are in the home, then you just, maybe keeping a copy and writing down all of the, safety plan that you talk about. Maybe it's not safe to keep it on, for them to keep it at home. So, maybe you you can keep it for them, or you can find, have them find support systems that can. Um, another way that you can address that is just, again, it's that long-term piece. It's talking about it and talking about it so that they kind of remember what are their resources. And then again, that order for protection assistance. So making sure that you have a great relationship with, if you don't have a campus advocate, really establishing a relationship with the community advocates, the local community advocate. That's going to be so critical, especially, if there needs to be assistance for an order for protection, if they want someone to help walk them through that process. And I think it can be very tricky, especially with confidentiality. Especially, I think counselors are in a great position on campus because there is that strong confidentiality piece. And so that's important. And I think that, as a counselor, it would be great to, maybe consider, what does that look like, the order for protection, and who do you have, who's a confidential person that you can refer students to, that they feel safe and that their information is going to be kept confidentially. Um, so just thinking about some of those immediate safety planning, and I didn't put confidentiality on there, but I think that, when we think about safety for victims, that's the biggest indicator for safety, is that we have confidentiality, and we know what clear absolute confidentiality looks like. And especially, when you are talking with students and you're helping them find support systems, and maybe it is that professor, that faculty that they feel safe with, but you want to make sure that they are aware of confidentiality. And if faculty are most likely, they are mandated reporters, and they will have to report that. And so again, these immediate safety planning, these are all things that you want to take in consideration, and let students know. I think the biggest thing for safety planning is just really providing students with the resources so that they can take informed action on what they want to do. And so I think confidentiality is a big piece for that. So again, it's just making sure, part of that safety planning, you discuss those things. And again, validate, if their physical safety, if they need to change classes, or if they end up having to move out of their dorm, you really want to validate the fact that, how hard that can be for them and how unfair, it is. And I think it can be really tricky, you know, if you are a counselor and a Title IX person, where that can be tricky because you can't really say anything that really makes you seem biased. So, again, for counselors, it's great because you do get to be that support for them. But, if you are a Title IX person, it can be very hard to do that. So you just want to make sure that part of that safety planning is someone who can be that bias supporter for them and provide validation. I thought sacrifice, or not, sacrifice is not the right word, but not jeopardize the investigation. So that's just something to keep in mind. Hanovi, can you, next slide, please? So thinking about holistic safety planning, I've kind of talked about it, where there's the physical piece where you want to think about campus safety, classes, public spaces on campus. You really want to start at, some of the questions you might want to ask is, when do you think you're going to run into your perpetrator? What are some that you can think of that, and maybe they haven't even run into their perpetrator in that space, but just it could be a potential space where they can run into them. So you want to start asking some of those questions, of getting them to really think about, where could I maybe run into my perpetrator? And then again, physical accommodations. You want to be aware of the accommodations that your campus not only are, have to accommodate for, but, maybe that's something that the campus will provide. You want to make sure that you have all those resources with them. So, um, when really talking with the student, maybe it's you're kind of figuring out where they're going to run into someone on campus, and maybe it could be class and they're not even aware that they can switch classes, or maybe faculty can provide some wiggle room as far as assignments, or thinking about just what those accommodations look like. You want to make sure that you inform them of those. Same with the dorm, changing that. And again, that's hard when it's the perpetrators at home. Even if there's not, because if the sexual assault happened at home, and think about still what the campus can accommodate for, and what faculty and staff might be willing to accommodate for. So just making sure that you have those options, and then resources such as transportation or, traditional activities, thinking about, the physical need for being around support, I think is huge. And again, with COVID, that makes it very hard because, you know, um, some of the activities have turned, online. And so finding ways to make sure that there's physical safety and physical wellness, but in a safe way. And then when thinking about emotional safety, again, it's that support, making sure you have that safe support. You're having students think about who their supports are. And again, this can just be, if we're thinking about the long term, maybe it can be asking them to think about, and, if it's safe for them to have a journal of, documenting how they feel when they're around certain people. So if they're around friends that, they're like, this is my support system. And then when they start thinking about how they feel after being around that person, and, maybe it doesn't feel really good. So, maybe thinking about, talking about how to just pay attention to how your mood is when you're around friends and family. But then, have them start thinking about self-talk. What are some of the, how are they talking to themselves, and is it something, just to write and not, have any shame about it. And, I think part of it is, it can be, when we think about sexual assault, a lot of shame comes with that. And so it's going to be really important to just really be okay, and working with students to be okay with, yeah, maybe the self talk isn't as positive, and we, and maybe we just recognize that and acknowledge that, and then really identify how it makes you feel. So, and safety plan for that, just to have them think about, oh, is this negative self-talk, just to be aware of that. And, maybe come up with some positive self-talk, reaffirming language that you can come up with the student as you're working with them on the safety plan. Self-compassion tools. So, finding resources. There are a lot of great infographics and resources, and I didn't put them on the slide, but if you want to email me and just, you're looking for specific campus resources, I can definitely send them your way, of just some tools that help students who have experienced sexual assault. So, providing that when you're safety planning. And then another big piece that I love so much are education groups. And, you on campus might not provide them, or, you might not have specific sexual assault education groups, but maybe your local community advocacy programs do. Um, this is a really great piece, especially when we think about isolation and validation, and that shame piece that comes with, experiencing sexual assault or being a victim or survivor, is that we really, we know that education groups are critical, because you are with, fellow, fellow, that's like the worst way to say it, but you are with other people who have experienced what you have, and who have gone through it. And so this education group really helps with that isolation, and it also validates, and it provides a space where you can safely process through. And I think, and just being, in this field, and having, I think the first time I ever really identified, sexual violence in my life was during, a sexual assault training. And so I think it's, and it brought up a lot, but it also was validating to know that, that's where these feelings are coming from. So education groups are critical. And so if you don't have them on campus, and if your community advocacy, your local advocacy programs don't, maybe thinking about how to create some of those on campus. We have at Redwind, we have a local advocacy program. It's a HASIA advocate program. And we developed an education group manual. It's an education group. Pretty much it comes with modules, and I would love to share those if you're interested. Some of it, there's domestic violence modules, there's sexual assault, sexual violence modules, and they're Native specific. And so if you are interested in that, please feel free to email me. And it's just something that you can do to provide, and part of that is that safety planning piece of getting, really creating that space where victims and survivors are starting to, put words to what has happened to them. So thinking about that emotional safety piece, and then safety planning, again, I think surrounding triggers. And I know trigger is also a word I think, can be triggering. But, thinking about content warnings, and I think there's a reason for that, um, a lot of these things, as much as as much time has passed, or even as much work that you have done, if you have, seen a therapist, or, you've done all this, that these things still come up, that they don't just go away. And I think I remember, I'm not sure if anyone's aware of the documentary. It was an R. Kelly documentary. And I remember seeing Rain, the Rape and Abuse and Incest National Network had posted, they received so many calls on their hotline when this documentary came out. And I think it's just, again, kind of those feelings that come up, and sometimes you just need to, process it through. So, part of that emotional safety planning is to talk about, what triggers are, and what you can do to help mitigate the impact of that. Um, some things that you can do are sense, if a certain smell triggers you into, bringing back all of these memories, maybe having a satchel of lavender, or, just our little bag of lavender that you can kind of change, smell. And if, I think even I've seen a lot on social media where there's content warnings. And I think that's so important, because it really can save someone's life when, they are prepared, they see something, and they get to decide, do I continue reading this or do I not? And unfortunately, just like there, I think if we are as trauma informed as can be, that is what we want to do. But there are still going to be things that might trigger a response, and so it's really safety planning with students to be prepared for that possibility, and to jot down. I think again, that journal piece is going to be important. How they feel, how something, when something happened, how did they feel, and to go even further with, how did you come back from that feeling? How did you, work through that experience, and what got you through? So again, identifying triggers, but then identifying how, how they got through that, and what are some of those things that got through. It could have been a walk. They went for a walk and that helped. It could be they meditated for 2 minutes, or it could be they went and talked to an elder. All of these things, you kind of want them to take note, and to have a space to jot those things down, and just be more aware of that. And then, so that's like a long-term and immediate safety. I think, especially when we're thinking about crisis, it might be, that might not be the time to talk about, um, triggers, or, even education groups. So you really want to think about, assessing that risk right there. So, if, it's that crisis, it literally like it happened and you are there, you are probably going to go into that immediate safety planning of, are you safe? Healthcare needs, medical care, law enforcement, campus, those things. And then when we think about this in the process, this is more of that long-term, really talking with students and providing long-term support on campus. Any questions? I don't know. I wanted to stop and see if anybody had any questions or thoughts. And if you do please feel free to put in the chat. Novi, next slide, please.
Sorry, it actually looks like we have a hand raised.
Okay.
Levine, I'm going to allow you to talk if you would like to say what your question or comment. You are currently muted, so. All right, there may be a way, so we can continue on.
Yeah, and if it comes back and you want to put it in the chat, feel free to do that. Next slide, Hanovi. So, and then thinking about mental safety, you want to allot our on this webinar, our counselors. So again, just that mental health support. I think the important piece is also traditional healers, especially if they're comfortable for that. Again, in confidentiality, thinking about just elders, it could be so having that link. And then again, it's just really meeting students where they're at. So, a big piece I think is just, if someone's experienced childhood sexual abuse or experienced sexual assault previous to being on campus, just meeting them where they're at and providing those resources. And, I think especially, and I don't want to say especially, but with sexual assault, often it is, we've seen in major, situations where, even media, or if there's a movie that comes out or a documentary, or even one of the, it was a Supreme Court justice being, in a space where, I think those things bring back so much. And so making sure you meet students where they're at and know that, even if it was, the experience was years and years and years ago, that, it's still possibly, as far as that risk to safety can be very real. So definitely meeting students where they're at and not minimizing that. And then I think, spiritual safety. So access to ceremonies, access to traditional healing activities, and having traditional medicines available, that you can provide, especially, I think, not especially just all around meeting, but, I think when, if a student is needing medical support and, are seeking a sexual assault forensic exam, having some of those medicines with them, that is specific to your community, but it can be anything that offers support. And then connecting with elders in the community. One thing that, when doing this work, that I think is really, I just think is so important, is going back to our traditional values and beliefs, and even consulting with elders in our community on how to uh, talk about sexual assault. And so, as someone who is, whether a counselor or an advocate or even law enforcement, to really learn about connect with elders on how what are the traditional beliefs around sexual assault, um, and and really how to talk about that, I think, is important. And I didn't know, I see there's the unmute button. Oh, I see. So, Novi, I don't know if you want to explain the hand raising, just
Yes. So attendees won't be able to speak by default. The reason we have the hand raise option is because we are able to see in the participant list if you have your hand raised. And if we see that, we are able to go in and unmute you, or at least allow you to unmute yourself so that you can directly ask your question or say your comment.
okay. So to have the unmute button, raise your hand if you would like to. Okay. I've never used the raised hand before, so I don't know how that works. Um,
It can be a little finicky, but
okay.
it's just to allow anyone who wants to ask their own question or comment.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll move to the next slide, and feel free to raise your hand at any time. Um, so I think another piece, something that I had to learn really fast as an advocate, was, some of this hard stuff that, safety planning, even if we feel this is the best route for safety, or if we feel, you know, that, you know, this is a risk to safety, really our role is to be as supportive and as um, respectful to autonomy as and body sovereignty, really. So it can be very hard to not insert, you know, an authority of, what's safe and what's not safe. And again, this goes with meeting where they're at. Even, if you don't, even if you personally don't feel that there's a risk or a safety risk, and the student is saying, no, I really, this really does feel like this is jeopardizing my safety, we really want to respect and honor that, and respect and honor that they get to make their own choices. We really are here to provide options. We're here to provide resources. We're here to establish relationships with community partners who we often, our students will be seeking out. So we want, our that's our role in this, and it's really to support students in their decisions. And so that can be hard if we feel that it isn't something that we would do or necessarily. So, just keeping that in mind, and how important that is, especially when you think about sexual assault, and how really, again, that just the feeling of not having any control over our bodies, and how that feeling can be, we really want to make sure that we are, that is the message we're conveying, is that they have that control. And it can be very hard, especially when, we are at, when we're safety planning, we often at times it's the victim or survivor who's having to, again, regulate their actions. And that can be very hard. And it can be very, it doesn't feel like you have very much control over yourself when you're having to change your classes, or you're having to change dorms, or you're having to a hard time in class because this horrific thing happened to you. And so I think our role is to really just support and validate as much as we can. as far as safety planning. And I think, one way that I hope to my message to convey is that safety planning, it is the first and foremost, it is focused on safety, and it is focused on, that's why it's safety planning. It's focused on those immediate physical safety, that we think about, making sure that they have that physical safety. But I also think, we definitely don't want to overlook, that emotional safety. We don't want to overlook, that mental safety and that spiritual safety. So we want to make sure that we are including that in our safety planning. Um, and, if you are, especially I think in the time of COVID, when we first talked about safety planning in this project, COVID was not, it was not something we were experiencing on campus. So, if you have questions and you have, just barriers that you're experiencing because of COVID, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will love to brainstorm and work through some of that, because I do think that it is a challenge when, you campus might be closed, or, some of the resources that we have are limited. Or just even their, hours might be limited, or appointments might be. So if you are struggling with that, please feel free to reach out. Um, and then another piece is just students. They are the experts on their lives. They have gotten themselves to that point, of being a college student. So they are the experts on their lives. So again, they might choose something, or, you know, something that we are, that compromises safety. But they are their own people, and, we're not here to control them. Again, I think, and this is for advocates on campus. Um, and I think it gets tricky when, you are a counselor, or maybe a campus safe security officer, or, faculty, where you do have obligations when you think about, um, safety, that, if this is safety and it is something that you have to report, absolutely, like, you have to comply. I think the piece there then would be to explain to the student, why you have to do that, and just to let them be aware of those things, instead of, um, doing it and not really explaining why, you had to take the action that you had to. So again, this is definitely, when I speak to this, I'm speaking to, as even just local community advocates who are working with students, that they are their own people, and they get to choose, and make their decisions for them. So, and again, this can be tricky. If you are even a campus advocate, you might have, um, obligations for safety on campus. So you want to be aware of that as well. And when you are aware of that, you want to make sure that you're bringing that to, the students' attention, for that. And I think, you can do this in, also, just in, you know, policies and protocol that you have, student handbooks. And I remember being a college student, I don't know if I ever read a student handbook, but maybe do a training, or, how do you engage so that students are aware of their resources, and they're aware, that there are resources out there for them. And I think another piece is when addressing childhood sexual abuse, how are you, conveying to students that, you are there for them to, safety plan, even when it is, you know, something that hasn't happened on campus, but something that, they still need to process through. So, these are just things to think about. And if you have questions or more specific, we have, I think, 30 minutes. If I didn't answer a question that you had, or maybe you were hoping to, get information, please feel free to raise your hand, or put that in the chat box. I would love to kind of talk that through. Hanove, I didn't know if you wanted to go to the next slide. I think it is lasting thoughts, always follow up. Again, have safety in mind. So following up, safety planning is not sometimes a checklist of we did it and it's done. It's an ongoing thing. And so you want to have that in mind. They're the experts in their own lives. And then, provide options, but don't enforce them. Again, I think when it comes to autonomy and sexual assault, autonomy is so critical when really thinking about safety. A sense of safety is having that autonomy. And then just know that you as a counselor, as an advocate, as faculty and staff, you are part of their safety plan. If they're coming to you, that you are part of their safety supports and their support. So just know that, and just keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So here's just where, I'm open for comments or questions or, anything. Please feel free to put that in there. I know it's so hard when thinking about safety planning, because I think there are so many different roles that we can play on campus, whether it's a counselor or whether it's a Title IX investigator or, Title IX resource person or a dean of student services. It can be really hard to navigate, what your role is. And I think, part of this project and why I love that we have this opportunity, it's really to provide just a holistic sexual assault response, whether it's, safety planning of just making sure we are holistically looking. And I think the most important piece is that, and I think it's our strength as tribal colleges and universities is that we lead, our campus, we lead with our traditional values and we lead with our traditional beliefs and knowledge. And so I think that's a strength that we have. So utilizing that and having those resources at hand is so important. And I think Novi put my name or my email in the chat. So if you have an email or a question, specifically, I just want to point out with this project, we are here, no charge to campuses. If you have questions, we are here. So please, even if you think, it's not something that we could help with, we might be able to, or we might know of resources that can help as you navigate through. And we have webinars, I think, on our website where we've had Lenny Hayes really talk about how to respond to male survivors and our Two-Spirit and LGBTQ survivors. And then we also have just creating a trauma-informed environment. I think as part of safety planning, it's really providing a space where, again, to go back to the first slide, it provides just a safe place where, everyone just feels safe, and we know that that's an ideal learning space. So just thinking about that. And we will be having some more webinars at the end this year, one specifically for, responding to childhood sexual abuse. And then just thinking about faculty and staff for, if a student discloses, because we know that oftentimes faculty, professors are sometimes the first person a student will turn to when disclosing sexual assault. So again, how do faculty and staff respond in a trauma-informed way, a relative-centered way? So we'll have that. And so any questions?
Does not look like we have any. Well, I will wrap up. Uh, Thank you, Raquel. Before we end the session, I want to let you all know that once the webinar closes, you'll be getting a pop-up for a survey. We'd love to hear what you thought, so if you're able to fill that out, we very much appreciate it. If you can't do so right now, you'll be getting one by email in about a day. In closing, I'd like to thank our presenter, Raquel, and I'd like to thank our captioner, Cindy, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope you all stay safe, and I hope to see you all at the next webinar.
Thank you.